Chapter 55. Reconciliation by way of revelation. Thomas. As was planned, Patricia and I got married 5 months later after everything that happened. We had gotten married in an area that was surrounded by trees and flower beds, the chief's house. We also had our reception there. It was very nice with many people there from work and others from out of town that Patricia knew. Not much of my family was left other than the family that I had just till recently inherited from my marriage, and also Greg Myers, who gave Patricia away. It was just my father who I had not reconciled with yet. It is strange of how someone's death can cause so much pain inside. So much that it causes more death. I were to realize of how very wrong I was in this thinking because of all of the things that were happening that were good. It gets to the point of a person having suffered so much in their lives, so many things they tried to build with good intentions have went so wrong, having times as this of when these good feelings arise, there is another feeling accompanied with it that brings a fear, a doubt that says, don't get too comfortable because this is not going to last too long. This is life, you know. Here it was the most important day of my life, and I was feeling inadequate about the present and therefore the future. And yet, I knew that things were getting better for me. I could see it with my eyes and feel it inside me. But, there was something there that needed confrontation and resolve in spite of its possible outcome. Suddenly, I was afraid and confused because I did not want this marriage to fail as my last one did so miserably. It was very hard. It almost killed me. This thing, fear, it truly comes to steal the joyous moment, doesn't it? But, even when it showed its face that moment, I suddenly saw that it has been ruling me for years, and that was the root of all of my anger and self-resentment. It caused me to feel vulnerable in my not realizing it and in my insecurities. The anger was used in coupled with fear. So it gave me nothing, and instead it took more from me and whatever peace of mind left to function. That day, as I walked off to myself for a few minutes, I stood up under an oak tree in the backyard and not far from the fence. My father, I thought of him much, wishing that he was able to be there to see how my life has taken such a positive turn, and wishing, I would guess, for to share my new happiness with him. And yet, there was a part of me that thought he would do nothing but criticize it and destroy the moment, and there I would be once more with new wounds unprovoked. Of course there was no way that I could be sure of that, you know, of where his thinking was at that point in his life regarding me, or even of where my life was. But, I was instinctively still hoping for the best, and because of the past, expecting the worse. I looked over at a beautiful Patricia who was standing talking and laughing with people, and smiled at her. I believed at that very moment a love for her more pure and grateful than before. I knew no man at that time in my life that was more blessed than I. This I really knew, you know. She truly saved me. This woman saved my life when she asked me to marry her. I was feeling as I could go no further and saw no sign of purpose, but she reached out and took my hand and saved me from myself, from my own confusion, my own pain. It was a confusion that was far too great for I to bear, and I just wanted to die. And even then, in my wanting to die, I felt that I still would not have attained any peace. But, Patricia saved me with her undying love for me. Yes, she did. My mother would have loved her. But even though all of this was happening for me, I still thought of my father. I thought of him, as he was when my mother was living among us, as Patricia is so full of life this day and time as my mother was. As I was feeling for Patricia in terms of my life, of making my life feel completed, I realized that I was as he in regards to my mother. Such deep love inside he felt for her as I feel for Patricia. So much compassion to live just to be in her presence and never wanting them to depart. Just so it had to have been the same for my father, and I saw this with my own eyes. I had a loving example before my eyes. There was a sudden soft wind that blew against me, and I looked up as the wind was blowing through the tree, and it was as the wind hitting the remaining leaves were speaking a counsel to me, some divine revelation. And a feeling of peace came over me, as also a sudden clarity revealed itself to me, telling me the time has come. I then understood his grief in losing my mother's presence, as if his very mind and spirit moved through me that moment, sharing his inner thoughts and feelings of his love for her, and his pains in losing her were with me. That was the clarity, the revelation. Those thoughts and feelings transmitted a very vital and yet terrifying question: if I were to suddenly lose Patricia, my wife, as he lost my mother. His wife, I in the same sense would react as he did in his pain. I suddenly understood him and his grief. Yeah, I thought it would have been good if we talked about everything, and I knew that it was not too late because my father still lived. My relationship with him was the only thing left, I understood, that needed fixing. I then knew that it could be healed because of now understanding everything he was feeling in the best sense that I could. I smiled because suddenly, the pains of the past went away. It was a wonderful feeling. Very nice. Patricia walked over to me, wrapping her arm around mine. "Come on, husband, let's dance." It would be a matter of time for I to face that lasting issue in my life. It would be soon, and yet without planning. I would be encouraged one last time to heal things by a brother and friend. Chapter 57. Saying goodbye to a brother and friend, Thomas. I went to the prison where Daniel was being held for execution. It was 2 days before that was agreed by the system for him to be executed. I made arrangements to talk to Daniel through the warden. After talking with many officers who recognized me from the case, I was allowed access to see him. I entered the room where Daniel was sitting in a chair in chains and wearing a straitjacket. I looked at Daniel and was able to see that the guards, because of facial marks and bruises, had beaten him. Daniel sat quietly, staring off into nothingness. I began to talk to him. "Thomas, I don't have a lot of time, so I will be brief. They say that you no longer talk, but I just want to say to you some things. I came to thank you, Daniel. You caused me to think of some things. You made me look at myself as a man and a human being, and because of you, I will be a better person. Can you believe that?" I began to laugh, and then I stopped laughing from shame and embarrassment. "Thomas. No, that wasn't right to say that. That was a bit biased, wasn't it? I'm sorry, Daniel. You did make me look at myself and realize that I was wrong about many things and my motive about them. There is nothing that I can do for you right now, but just know that you did a great deal for me, and because of the change that was brought over me, will I be a better person for everyone around me. No longer an endangerment. I just wanted you to know that." I turned to walk out of the room, and suddenly I heard Daniel's voice. "Daniel. We are brothers. You and I, Thomas. I am pleased to have known of you. You are great as the sun, and your example will shine upon many men, bringing great warmth. Thank you, brother Thomas, for saving me and for saving many." I stood there and smiled at him. "Thomas. Thank you, Daniel." After I thanked him, I left. This entire thing taught me that not every experience is an all bad one. There are some, if not all, we are able to get something productive and positive out of them if they are looked at with an open heart and mind. I realized that I forgave him for Andrew Rawlins' death. I sometimes wonder if it was because he was caught and was to be executed for what happened. Or if it was just I forgave him on the basis of forgiveness itself because my life was understood by me. I believe it was. And it was that in which inspired the strength in me to be able to go to Andrew's family and ask for their forgiveness. I feel that had I not been able to forgive Daniel, I would not have been able to forgive myself for what happened to Andrew in order to be able to find the strength to go to his wife. In that event, in going to her, I also became the godfather of Rawlins' child. His wife had a baby girl named Adrian. What I am thankful for mostly of this ordeal was, this also inspired me to go and visit my dad after so many years in the nursing home downtown. After my mother passed away, about 3.5 years later, my father started to mentally fade away and he lost the ability to walk, so I had to place him in a nursing home. I went to see him the morning before Daniel was executed. I guess since the chapter of Daniel was now closed, and I understood my father's pains, I sought to see if this also would be a closure issue or just maybe another beginning. I was hoping that things would not be the same as they were the last time I saw him. I was hoping that it would be better. I had no idea what this would be like, having not seeing or trying to talk to him in so long. But I needed to see him again. Strange, but I could sense the spirit of my mother urging me to go to him. As if she too was saying to me that it was enough time wasted on the past and it is time to forgive and to love in order to truly live. The head nurse told me what section he was in. So, nervously I walked down to and in the area where he was staying. He was sitting in his wheelchair playing chess with a friend of his by the name of Walter. My father was dressed in his red and brown checkered night robe in white dengue socks and light brown slip-on house shoes. Him and his friends suddenly shared and laughed, and during his friend's laugh, his friend suddenly gazed over and spotted me walking slowly towards them. His friend had looked pointing at me and said, "Hey, isn't that the guy from television there? Look." My dad looked up at me and smiled. I was glad that he smiled. He got up and stood out of his wheelchair. I and others looked and we were shocked because years ago, after my mother died, he had lost the will to even walk anymore, but I guess in seeing me, his will took a sudden turn for the better. It was beautiful to see him walk again. He walked slowly over to me smiling. He reached his arms out to me and hugged me, kissing me on the cheek, and told me while he held me tight around my neck, "I am so proud of you, Tommy boy. So proud. So proud. Tommy boy." He had not called me Tommy boy since I was 12 years old. I was touched all the way down to my soul, and it made me cry, because it told me that he saw all of what I was going through with the case with Daniel Veu. In his support, he was with me all the while when I thought he didn't care. I held him back and just cried, because I loved him so much and just wanted and needed to hear those words from him for so long, and finally he told me, "I love you, son. Because of what you did in coming here, I can go on living." Suddenly all of what happened made sense to me of why I went through everything. So many paths I was walking at the same time, and that one, the most difficult one of all of them, led me back to my father. The father that I thought I lost the day I lost my mother. From that moment I knew that my life was going to get better and have a meaning, because I had not a clue of what that truly meant. You know what I mean? What my life meant and what direction it was going in, or even if it was going in any direction. And that is worse, because if your life is going nowhere, symbolically speaking, you are really dead and the conflict increases. Therefore, no direction is really the wrong and worst direction. But there was no more conflict inside my head anymore. Everything by the grace of God was clear to me. Before, I was as a train running away off its track and out of control, going nowhere but only to destruction, that I could not see myself. I was a cop who made it to detective with a great record in the force, but my personal life had no real meaning because privately, I was a mess. I was reckless, selfish, and out of control, even though my career was very much in control, until Daniel exposed my closet that night on that roof. He placed a mirror in front of my face and made me look into it. I became a robot, more of my job and less of a human being with feelings and compassion. And from that point on, I had begun to make terrible mistakes even on my job, one that cost the life of a good friend. Daniel was right. A month later, I moved my father out of the nursing home and into a home that I bought for Patricia and all of us until he passed on just this past July the 6th. But, I need to share this with you. One morning at the break of dawn I got up to use the restroom. As when I usually do this, I would normally check on my dad's room to see if he is all right. This particular morning when I checked his room, his bed was empty. I was concerned of where he was, and so I began to walk around the house looking for him. I went to the den upstairs and I noticed that the balcony door was open halfway. I slowly walked over to the balcony and looked outside and saw my father sitting quietly in his chair looking at the sunrise. I walked outside asking him if he was okay. He did not answer me, he just kept looking at the sun rising. It was the most beautiful sunrise I have ever in my life seen. It was as if the most careful artist painted it. The sky was very blue and the clouds were thick and streaky like and fiery reddish and yellow, and also sky blue colored clouds were there. And with the sun coming up under them, it seemed to have caused the sky, even though blue, to reflect a cinnamon-type glow. It was breathtaking. I looked around my dad to see his face, and he was just smiling softly at the great sight. I reached back behind me and grabbed a chair to sit down next to him. I said to him, "That is beautiful." He still did not answer me. We sat there for a few more seconds and then he spoke to me. "Mr. Thomas McDermott Sr., you know, before you were born, your mother told me one day as we were looking at the sunrise that beauty is not in what you see with your eyes. She said that beauty is the feeling that you receive from what your eyes behold. She told me that when she was but 19 years of age. She taught me, showed me how to feel things as they truly are. She showed me what freedom is, Tommy." As he said that, I noticed a group of birds flying through the scene. I looked at him and he was looking so peaceful. He even looked different to me, kind of younger, almost like a little boy reflecting through an older man's face. He gazed over at me for a second and smiled and then turned back to look at the sunrise. "Mr. McDermott Sr., you know, son, she is now back a part of all that we are seeing this day. She has returned to the Creator and Ruler of all things. I am feeling the same feeling that I always got when I looked at her. I am able to feel this day while looking at this beautiful sight. She is before us this morning. I see her, I feel her. When the sun rises, she rises with it, and I could feel her this morning saying good morning to me, and when it sets, she will set with it saying good night to me. I feel and know this is what I am seeing this morning. I feel her with us, son, and she is still beautiful to me. Oh, how generous God is to me with his angel." I looked over at my dad and asked him if he missed her. He said, "No, not as much as I used to." I asked him why not. "Mr. McDermott Sr., what she told me about beauty helped me to understand that there is really no such thing as death when there is love. Love itself is a life force in its own right. In my pain of her leaving, I had forgotten this. God is love and love is eternal and comforting. She is not dead. She is with the living. It is we who are with the dead, the blind. I know she loves me because each day that I live she shows me as she is showing me this morning. Wisdom says of God, I am God's daily delight. Wisdom delights the Spirit of God during God's creation and glory. If I could not feel her, I would miss her more past missing her in the physical. But she is with me still in this spirit until I am again with her incomplete as was. I do not have to miss her, Tommy, she is right there in the midst of the heavens." He looked over at me, who was thinking of my mother, and noticed me tearing and smiled, and then he laid his left hand over my right hand, patting it softly. And then he said something very familiar to me that a dear friend, who is now my wife, said to me in the hospital, "It will be all right, Tommy boy, it will be okay." 3 days later my father passed away in his sleep. It was a quiet morning with a similar sunrise as the one we witnessed together the morning he told me of my mother's words to him. Patricia slowly walked into his room as I sat on his bed holding his hand, smiling at him. And she caressed my back in support, asking, "Dad left us, huh?" "Yes, he's gone home," I answered her. She asked me after a few seconds as she bent down by me, taking my other hand as I sat, "How do you feel?" I looked at her smiling and then back at my dad and said, "I feel at peace. Yeah, I feel at peace." After we sat in the room for a while, we walked to the balcony to see the sunrise. We looked out at the sunrise that morning and I shared with her what he told me of the words of my mother. It rained softly that morning and the home held a peace that was accepting. It did not feel as a death took place. He taught me through that conversation that death, if misunderstood, could only cause an internal death within us as well as sadness. It could actually pierce us at our very minds and souls. It helped me a great deal when he passed away after learning this truth. Death is only a sign of life in another form. A form that is intangible, yet tangible if you can understand it, you can grasp upon it, thus there is truly no death. After my mother passed away, we were both so hurt, we never sat and talked about how much her passing affected us. We only caused the misunderstanding and the hurt to separate us. She was my mother and I hurt as a son would hurt. She was his wife and only love, and so he hurt in that sense. In this kind of distinction we could never had understood the department of our hurt unless we talked about it, but we didn't, therefore we could not help to comfort one another. It caused him to strike out at me, and that caused me to run away from him, in my way of striking out at him, feeling that I was leaving him in a pain that he deserved. That evil motive would rule my personality through my own guilt, because I knew deep within that I should have never left him at a time as that, because despite of who she was to us distinctively, she meant the same to us because we both adored her. Sometimes when the only shoulder that you have to lean on is gone, you fall. My inner guilt caused me to mistreat people who I worked with and even on the street in my arrests. I was way too aggressive on the street at times because I would never talk to anyone about what was causing me to feel burdened and angry, careless and arrogant. I treated so many people cruel who did not deserve it. I did not know myself at the time until that night I was hanging on that ledge and could not think of anything that I contributed to this life with any real meaning that would truly give my life or anyone else's life any more humility than it had. But, this day I am a much more sensitive person to things. It feels good to care about things, you know? It feels good to care about people in general. I no longer feel like a hypocrite with a shield, you know, like a dead person yet walking in life as a zombie. I now know what it feels like to be a human being, a police detective, a husband and even a friend to my friends. I realize now that all of those are in harmony with each other, working in one of the same direction. Hey, I even listen to the chief when he talks to me now. And I am learning much from him now that I am able to hear him. He is a good man. But, most of all things in my life, I am just pleased that my dad and I joined together before he left to join God and my mother in those same heavens that I rise to behold every morning now when God pulls me up. I am glad that we got the chance to talk about my mother and also the two of us as father and son. I see it as a form of repentance for him and myself. I thank God for his healing spirit. Sincerely, Thomas Ellis McDermott.